Elizabeth Fritzl had been held captive for 24 years. She told the police the story they would not forget. She had been held captive, assaulted, and abused by her father. They found out this was only the start of a deep, troubling story. Here we will find out how a man could maintain a public face of respectability, but that public face of respectability merely hid a far darker, private reality. Surely the most extraordinary and the most tragic thing about Josef Fritzl is that he managed to camouflage himself as a respectable member of society, as a pillar of the community, while at the same time he was just leading this double life. Elizabeth was born April 6, 1966. From 1984 to 2008, at the age of 18 she was held captive as a sex slave by her own father Joseph. Imprisoned in Joseph's cellar at age 18, Elizabeth would be trapped there until she was 42, enduring near constant rape and torture at her father's hands. She was one of 7 kids in the house. Joseph had 3 sons and 4 daughters. Joseph, himself, grew up as an only child raised solely by his working mother. His father, who was a severe alcoholic, had deserted the family when he was 4, and never again came into contact with him. Fritzl Sr. later fought as a soldier in the Wehrmacht during World War II, and was killed in action in 1944. When 18-year-old Elizabeth Fritzl suddenly went missing from the family home, where she had grown up. Her parents were understandably frantic with worry. Her mother, Rosemary, hastily filed a missing persons report, and while her father Joseph thanked the concerned friends for their sympathy and support. As the weeks went by, with no word from her, everybody started to fear the worst. Then out of nowhere, a letter arrived from Elizabeth, claiming she had grown tired of living with them in their house in Austria, and had decided to run away. Joseph told police he had no idea where she had gone, but that she had likely joined a religious cult, something she had talked about doing before. But the apparently concerned, middle-class father, who was a respectable salesman and a good family man, knew exactly where his daughter was. In fact, she was just a few feet below where the officers were standing. Only 24 years later would anyone discover the truth that Fritzl had imprisoned his daughter inside the dirt-walled cellar underneath this home. He raped her, almost daily, and surviving depravity, and cruelty and squalid darkness, she gave birth to 7 children, one of whom died. His crimes were so terrible that even today, their retelling the story still has the power to profoundly shock everyone. At the age of 42, just under a year after Elizabeth was finally rescued, Fritzl got a taste of life under lock and key. When he was sentenced to life on his 74th birthday. In fact, Elizabeth's nightmare began years before that, when her father tricked her into going downstairs to the hidden cellar underneath their house. This is when he started sexually abusing her from the age of 11. Fritzl, who admitted to raping his daughter more than 3,000 times, would later say, "I knew that Elizabeth did not want the things I did to her. I knew that I was hurting her. But the urge to finally be able to taste the forbidden fruit was too strong." After finishing school aged 15, she started a course to become a waitress, but before she had finished ran away from home and went into hiding in Vienna with a friend. She was found by police 3 weeks later and returned home, where she rejoined and completed the course and was offered a job in the nearby city of Linz. It was her chance to finally get away from her abusive dad and have a new start in life, but Joseph had other ideas. For the last 3 years he had secretly been turning the cellar into a prison cell. On August 28, 1984, Joseph called his daughter to the basement, asking her to help carry the new door which would complete his renovations. At this point he knew he had to keep her from ever getting out and telling her story to anyone. There, he knocked her unconscious with an ether-soaked towel before handcuffing her and dragging her into the cramped, windowless cellar hidden behind shelving in his workshop. That was to be her prison for the next 24 years. In that space was only a bed and TV. It was here that he chains her within that space. Here he forces her to write that letter saying that she was going to run away and join a cult. Josef then drove 100 miles out of town to mail the letter. Over the next few years, the police investigation into her whereabouts ran cold and was filed away. Elizabeth found herself at the mercy of her evil, merciless father. To the outside world, Josef was the smartly dressed engineer who drove a Mercedes, had a number of other properties, and worked hard to provide for his wife Rosemary and their 7 children. But in the dark subterranean world where Elizabeth was trapped, he was a depraved monster. The level of depravity and suffering Elizabeth was forced to endure in the dungeon, just meters underneath her oblivious mother, is difficult to comprehend. At first tied up or shackled to an iron pipe, for 8,642 terror-filled days and nights, her father repeatedly visited the cellar, to rape her and often punished her by leaving her without food or electricity. Sometimes leaving her in complete darkness for up to 10 days at a time. For the first 9 years Fritzl, now 73, did not utter a single word. In later years he raped her in front of the 3 children he had imprisoned alongside her and forced her to watch pornographic videos, which he made her reenact with him while her children watched on. At his trial, prosecutor Christian Burkheiser told a jury, he tied her up and then the next day he secured her by tying a leash around her waist that further limited her movement. This was an 18-square-meter room, the same size as the jury bench where they were sitting. She had a small basin, no bath, no shower, often no heat. He would come, switch the lights off, rape her, then leave. There was nothing there to make her life more bearable. There was no daylight. He would turn down the lights when he came down, attacking her in front of their little children. She added, there was no communication between him and her during the first few years when he raped her. He attacked, left, and said nothing. The worst thing for Elizabeth was not the rapes themselves, nor the appalling conditions. It was the uncertainty. How long would he stay? When would he come back once he had gone? Would he come back at all after he left her for his holidays? She was always wondering if she was ever going to get out of there alive. She was a broken person. He was the absolute ruler. He had complete control. He decided what would be eaten, what medicines would be allowed downstairs, who could leave and when. The electricity was switched off for hours at a time, sometimes deliberately, sometimes due to a power cut that he would not repair. She spent up to 10 days at a time in complete darkness. In the winter it was bitingly cold, in the summer it was blisteringly hot. You had to wipe the moisture from the walls. There was no torch, no candles, no warm food. Even when she had babies to take care of, the electricity would go off. 2 years into her captivity, Elizabeth became pregnant, though she miscarried 10 weeks later. So the first child that's actually born is in 1988, and it's a girl. Elizabeth named her Kirsten. Can we just try and imagine how awful this birth must have been? In those faded, humid, dark and dank conditions. Fritzl has given his daughter a book on childbirth, a towel, a pair of scissors, and a couple of napkins, and in effect has just allowed Elizabeth to deliver her child by herself. In 1990 a second child, Stefan, was born. By 1991 Elizabeth Fritzl had been incarcerated in the cellar beneath the house, for almost 7 years. In that time she'd given birth to 2 children, Kirsten and Stefan, and now she was pregnant with a third. Meanwhile, upstairs, her mother, brothers, and sisters lived on completely unaware of her situation. But Josef refused to allow her to leave the dungeon to give birth, instead just giving her a book on childbirth and a box of aspirins for the pain. When Elizabeth gave birth, it was in a damp cellar on a dirty blanket. She never had any proper medical attention, just aspirin or cough medicine. She was expected to fend for herself even through childbirth, said prosecutor Mrs. Burkheiser. Over the next 24 years, Elizabeth would give birth to 5 more children. One more was allowed to remain in the basement with her, one died shortly after birth, and the other 3 were taken upstairs to live with their grandparents. In order to conceal what he was doing from Rosemary, Josef staged elaborate discoveries of the children, often placing them on bushes near the home or on the doorstep, along with a note written by Elizabeth claiming she couldn't take care of the baby and was leaving it with her parents. Social services never questioned the appearance of the children and allowed the Fritzls to keep them as their own children. Despite the horrific circumstances, Elizabeth cared for her children who stayed with her, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, and tried to teach them with the rudimentary education she herself had. In this damp, fetid prison, the children, who were weakened by lack of oxygen, and who had never seen daylight, were assured by their mother, "Heaven is up there." The ceiling of the cellar was just 5 feet from the ground, meaning that Elizabeth and her children, who were between 6 and 19 when they were rescued, spent their days either crouching or lying down. Elizabeth and Fritzl's 3rd child, Lisa, was born. She had a heart defect. Pragmatically, Josef is worried that the so-called soundproofed cellar is not going to be able to cope with a small baby who is constantly in pain and therefore constantly crying. One can also presume that Elizabeth herself is saying to her father that there's something wrong with the baby, and he has to take action. The action that he takes is that he puts Lisa on their doorstep with a note which again, Elizabeth has been forced to write, saying this is her daughter and would her parents please look after the little girl. The little girl is found on the doorstep and brought into the household. Baby Lisa had emergency surgery to correct the heart defect and began life with her grandparents Rosemary and Josef. In 1993, Josef agreed to Elizabeth's repeated requests to enlarge the prison by an extra 20 square meters, putting her and her children to work for years digging out soil with their bare hands. Josef started converting more space for Elizabeth, Kirsten, and Stefan. Josef is beginning to try to normalize this downstairs life, so he's moving in refrigerators and he's moving in things that the children downstairs might want to play with. There is also a television there. Now, they're aware of what the outside world is like. They also now have pets. There's a goldfish and a canary, but Josef is responsible for everything that goes into that space. On December 16, 1994, a 2nd child arrived on the doorstep. Another note was found from Elizabeth, saying the baby was called Monica. Lisa and Monica were adopted by their grandparents. Elizabeth later said she and her children were too terrified to try to escape because her father had told her the heavy concrete and steel door, opened using a remote control combination lock, was booby-trapped. He told Elizabeth there was a light trigger which would either electrocute her or gas her, killing everyone in the cellar. In addition, there were 3 locked doors and she never tried to get out of them. It is not known how long Fritzl intended to keep his daughter and her 3 children, who had never seen the outside world or even breathed its air, captive in the basement. But in 2008, her eldest child Kirsten became critically ill, from what was later believed to be kidney failure. Elizabeth begged her father to allow the 19-year-old to get medical attention, and when she eventually became unconscious in the early hours of the morning of April 19, 2008, he let Elizabeth help him carry Kirsten out of the dungeon and called an ambulance. He claimed that he had found the girl leaning against the wall of his house, clutching a note from her cult member mother Elizabeth. When doctors were unable to diagnose the cause of Kirsten's illness, they put out a public plea in the media for Elizabeth to come forward. Unluckily for Fritzl, Austrian TV picked up on the case, portraying him as a man in despair as he tried to find Kirsten's mother in time to get the information needed to save the 19-year-old's life. As his lies collapsed in on him, he took the enormous gamble of taking Elizabeth to the hospital. But police, tipped off by the suspicious doctors, at the signs of neglect they saw in the sick teenager, were waiting for them on the grounds of at least charging the mother with child cruelty. Elizabeth was at first reluctant to talk and only opened up when the police officers promised her she would never have to see her father again. She began with the words, "No one will believe me." It took Elizabeth 2 hours to give the officers the basic details of what she had suffered as she told a story which would soon shock the world and make Josef Fritzl's name synonymous with pure evil. Fritzl himself never showed any remorse, insisting during an interview in prison it's normal to have a family in the cellar. But more importantly, the unthinkable depravity Elizabeth and her children had endured for so long was finally over.
Point of view of the criminal police, the missing person case Elizabeth Fritzl can now be deemed as solved. Nevertheless, police investigations will be continued.
Thanks for joining us and hope that you enjoyed our latest podcast. Please follow us on the links in our channel page. And leave a review. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also hit the notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case. Thanks again and see you here next time.